Hi everybody. So welcome to our very final critique. I'm really excited to see what everyone's been working on. And in this assignment, what you were doing is essentially just taking what you felt was the most successful or appropriate color harmony for your design and just basically moving it into the final design stages, maybe making any, sort of adjustments. A lot of times I think when you go to from the thumbnail level, which is like you could say like the structure of a design, and then when you start working on the final design, sometimes you need to add maybe a little more detail, or just kind of make some adjustments to just tweak it a little bit more. So it's, your opportunity to take it from, you could say, the draft phase to a more finalized phase, you know. And so that's what we'll be doing today too, is just kind of looking at everybody's designs and seeing where we might look at some possibilities for just, taking it to the next level. Um, taking it to the next level, I think I probably mentioned that a few times in the group critiques. Um, I always find that a really interesting process because sometimes when you look at a design, you think, hey, everything looks really great, looks really complete. I have this experience a lot. And then somehow maybe you do a few tweaks to it, and then you look at the previous design and then the design you've tweaked. Maybe you saw a few little areas that you could work on. And it's really kind of, can be really quite amazing how small changes, like not very big ones, maybe just a few shifts in color or value or moving things around a little bit or changing the size of things, those kind of small things can suddenly make a really tremendous difference in a design. And you can, so, it's one of those, it's good news, bad news kind of thing, whereas you can almost always keep sort of fiddling with a design and strengthening it, which is great because you can see your skills improving, and because you will improve when you do that. Um, but then the bad news is it seems like you're never finished and you never can complete it. So a lot of times as designers, I think we have a deadline and we just do what we can by that deadline. And I talk to a lot of students and other people in design, and everybody says, yeah, I don't know, it doesn't feel quite complete yet. So if you feel that way, in this class or in another class, you're not alone. It's, I think, a very common experience in design that we try to just do the most we can with the time that we have available to us. Okay, all right, let's get started and see what people are working on. Okay, Mark, yes, I really like the warm color scheme. I think that works really well. Your background, I think, works really well. We've got a lot of overlapping and translation and dilation. Um, and some rotation of this module, which I think looks great. And you've worked, to the edges, like some of those earlier concepts, which I think are always really valuable to keep in mind. And then your text is a little bit more saturated, brighter colors, so it's standing out. So I would say I would keep, so a couple things. I feel like you could play with your text a little bit more. The first thing is symmetry. So you have your text in a symmetrical arrangement. Now, this class, I keep saying this is not a typography class, but we are actually learning a lot about typography. We have spent quite a lot of time with it, so I feel okay with maybe adding in some like more kind of, you could say, I wouldn't call them advanced, but more kind of typographic kind of concepts, if you don't mind. Might as well learn them since you're working with typography. And the first is with symmetrical text. I would say that it's pretty rare that you create symmetrical text. Except when you have a very formal type of design. And I would say formal as in like maybe a wedding or a funeral or maybe a graduation, like an invitation, something like that, that you want it to be really have that, kind of formal kind of quality to it. Otherwise, you'll notice in design that in general in professional designs, it's very rare that you'd see symmetrical design just because of it has that formal quality. And then plus, you don't have a symmetrical background, so I think adding an extra bit of symmetry to an asymmetrical design, I don't think those two necessarily marry well together, to keep going with that wedding metaphor. So I would just take, I would probably be inclined to just go along the left side here, take and draw a guideline in, and then pull all of your text to that guideline. What does that do? We always say in design that like aligning text, left or right justifying, doesn't matter, strengthens the design. It automatically kind of gives it a backbone, which I think is really always really good. And there's other reasons why we align text. You know, a left alignment is the most common alignment, and that is because when people read, they're always trying to find the next back to where they were before. So, you know, we read along a line and then we go back to that same spot. And if it's not there, we have to find the new place. And that is why symmetrical text is not generally used that much either, is because it puts a little bit of more effort on the part of the reader. So those are two good reasons. I'm sure there's more. But yeah, try left aligning it. The other thing I would do is work a little more with contrast of scale. And contrast of scale applies in all parts of design, whether it's just like working on sort of an abstract design with shapes, or whether it's working with text. You kind of have the same principle in mind, which is that you can change scale to make it more interesting. And when it comes to text, you can also use scale to create emphasis. So what you want to do here is decide which of these two pieces of text is the most important. Is it this or is it this? And then you make that text larger, like quite a bit larger, like you make it. So when you look at it, you go large versus small. And again, it doesn't really, it sort of depends upon you as a designer or in conjunction with your client, which text you think has the most, needs to be strongest, needs to be the most, you know, obvious. But so that's what I'd work on a little bit more. Then I might also, see, this is where the small details can sometimes really take up a lot of space in terms of thinking. Then I might also, just put it in Photoshop here because I want to take a look at the saturation here. Okay, so it's pretty saturated. It feels like maybe I might try maybe lightening it a little bit. It feels like maybe it's still not kind of coming out from the background quite enough in terms of maybe making it, maybe the bigger, smaller thing will help, or making it a little bolder, but you know, making it just a little bit like stand off the page just a little bit more from the background. So you might give that a try. Okay, all right, well I think you're going in a good direction, and just keep playing with your typography. Okay, Ebony, let's see here. Oh yes, so here's, sometimes it's actually nice to see it without the white, even though I understand that's the, you know, the format that you were asked to use, but it's nice to see without the white, because actually the white does tend to take a little bit of attention away from the subtle colors. But in any case, let's look at it this way. That's fine. Yeah, so I agree. I think you've done a really nice job here at allowing the text to be a little more legible, which I think is, you know, so important. And let's actually open this in Photoshop here. Yeah, I think your text is easy to read, and that's because you've got good contrast between this darker text with the lighter background, and vice versa here. And contrast is typically the way that we make, you know, almost anything in a design legible, more legible. Is if things are too close in contrast, then they sort of blend into each other. Yeah, I like that. I like the gradient in the background. I think the analogous color harmony, the cool color harmony looks really good. You know, you've done a nice job here too of lining this text up to each other, which allows it to look like it really belongs in the design in a really strong way. Okay, yeah, you know, I don't actually see anything that I would recommend changing it. To me, it looks quite polished and complete, so nice job. Okay, Wandra, yes, I think this has really come along. I really like the depth of the star, and also the addition of these elements, you know, here with the movement. I think that looks really good, the way you pulled things off the edge of the page. I think your complementary color harmony suits your design. It gives a lot of energy. So I only have just a few suggestions here at this point. The first one is the background. So the yellow background tends to really is a very bright color, and it comes forward. And I would like to maybe see you experiment with maybe taking the purple and put that into the background. Maybe the stars could be a little bit more of the yellow color, or brighter purple, So what you'll find is if you put a darker, cooler color in the background, your purple, it will recede backwards and it'll just make your design pop that much more. So that's the first thing I'd recommend. The second is to make sure that you're really trying to think of lining your text up in the design a little bit more. I think the easiest way is to line it up to itself, in the sense of, maybe take all of this text, take this text, and line it up with this text up here. I'd probably just take these two pieces, line it up here, and then move the graphic design banner maybe up to the top. So it'll be the only thing that's rounded, it'll be at the top, and then everything else that is more kind of perfunctory text, informational text, will go to the bottom. And I would say, take your text and add a margin for yourself. So I drew a line in here from my guideline, here from my edge, and this is where I'd pull all of my text to that edge, so that it all flows along there. I'd even take another one up here just to remind myself not to get too close to the edge down here too, to give yourself a little more margin. You could even go a little bit more, a little higher there. Okay, and then if you want it to be complementary, which I think is a nice idea for your design, take the free classes and turn it into either purple or yellow, one of those colors. And if it seems like it's getting lost in the design, you can, experiment with making it darker purple or lighter purple, really light purple, to kind of make it stand out, to give it more contrast. Okay, so those are some of the areas that you could work on. Okay, Tracy, okay, I like the monochromatic color. I think that's a really nice choice for your design, the idea of, fashion. It seems like women's fashion, right? Sometimes we don't even have to say what it is when we use color. And, because color can be so strong, like especially the pink color, we automatically assume that this is going to be fashion for women. And yes, and I like the contrast in the text color with the size, or I should say the size. So here's the few things I'd work on a little bit more. I'd work on more contrast. I think the text, maybe try making the background a little darker. Let's just look into Photoshop here and see here. So this is your pink, kind of your pink base, or your red base, I should say. So I would go in your background and go really pretty dark, like really pull it down so that things on top can be a little more easy to see. Alternately, you could start making all of your text a little lighter so it pops off the page. Okay, then I would keep lining things up, just like we've talked about, like all of this text is just sort of floating in the space. So kind of think about, is it going to line up here? It can line up actually in both places. So, but maybe it could, well, maybe you could have the top text, on its own, and then maybe you could move all of this text and line it up. Okay, so that's what I'd work on here. The other thing too is I do feel like maybe there's a sense of something else could happen in the design. At this point, it feels like it's maybe just a little text, and what else could we do to it to make it more interesting? So maybe you could sort of develop a little bit more of a pattern, like a kind of an interesting pattern. You remember back in what we did in week 1 and week 2, where we created sort of interesting designs out of shapes. I think that could be really beautiful in your design. Kind of to just sort of make it look like it pulls in just a little bit more of the elements, ideas from our class. See how you can make that happen just a little bit more. So keep experimenting with this. I love the color, and I like some of the text treatments you're working on. Hey, Brian, yes, it's true that thumbnails really are more of a rough draft. That's exactly right. Sometimes they're a little bit more complete than other times, but really, you find that when you make, like I mentioned earlier, when you make your design larger, you find that you need to maybe add a little bit more, maybe details or textures, you know, to just bring things to life, which I think you have. To me, it looks like you've done a nice job. I really like the kind of papery watercolor effect you have in the background. I think that's really beautiful. That's one of the things in the software. It's so easy to kind of add a little texture like that, which I think can, when you have a large amount of negative space, you can add sort of really subtle things just to really bring it to life, which I think you've done a nice job of. And I like the sort of the interior element here. And in your case, you know, you have a very symmetrical design, which I think really lends itself to symmetrical text. So I think that looks really good. Let's just take a look at this in Photoshop. Let's just find it here. Here we are. So the only really thing here that I caught my eye a little bit is the text color. Couple things with the text. Text is always something that takes a little experimenting with. So with the text, you know, something that, you know, when you're off on your own, I think it's just, you know, you can use whatever colors you want. But I think that when we're studying like color, I think it's a good idea to, I'm clicking on it just to kind of check the underlying hue, to kind of see instead of using black or even white, how you can actually use a color from your color harmony, but just in a really dark form of that color. I think I've actually talked about that earlier, maybe with somebody else earlier this week. So for example, like this color right in here, this is a great color here. This could actually be the color, can you see it's sort of picking up quite a lot of that blue? So it's dark, but it still remains within that color harmony. So you get the benefit of a dark text, which is, why do we want dark text oftentimes? Well, because we want it to be legible, you know, we want it to really pop. But you can also then tie it more closely in with your harmony. So give that a try, like a dark blue or whichever one of these kind of blues or purples, you know, kind of greeny colors you want to work with. So you can sort of see here the difference between the black versus the dark blue. And if that's not a dark enough, just go, you know, a little bit darker. But you'll notice that you can sort of go down further in the color picker, and you don't have to go all the way to black to get something close to black. The other thing I would do here is I might make the size of these two texts different. So, you know, maybe the author could be bigger and book one could be smaller, or vice versa, so that they have a different kind of visual weight. And that's just typically how type will be done in a situation like this, where you have like the main text is going to be really big, like the title. Maybe you would have like secondary text. I would probably go with secondary text. Well, it's really hard to say, but one of these should be bigger or smaller. Whichever one you think is most important to emphasize. Otherwise, yeah, I think this has really really been developing really nicely, and it's pulled in so many of our concepts from our class, like texture and volume and symmetry and you know, shapes. So that's really awesome. Okay, Velvet. Yeah, I really like the way this has evolved. I think the text is very interesting now, where it's a little bit more, doesn't have quite the amount of movement, so it's a little easier to read, but it's still very interesting because of all of the way you've added this beautiful texture. So I think it turned out really well. I agree with you too. I really like the color of like the dark color, the white, black, and then that kind of red. I find that particular color combination is always gives you a kind of a dark, mysterious, sort of crime quality, you know. So I think it's a really good choice for your design. And I also like these kind of interesting elements, especially on this side, sort of like it almost looks like a microbe. And then this is very interesting, this whole element in here with the translation, dilation, the shapes, you know, kind of going inwards. Yeah, overall, I think it looks really good. I would say the only thing that popped out that seemed a little bit out of place in terms of the value, or like the contrast, was this element. It seemed to be maybe getting a little too much attention, like it pulled our eye a little bit. I would consider muting that a little bit more. You know, kind of make it sort of balance with these other elements, which are, I think, equally as interesting. Or maybe more interesting. But in any case, that's the one thing I would maybe work with. And then let's look at this in Photoshop. So, okay, so we've talked a little bit in previous lessons or critiques on aligning text, and I think in yours, what I would do here is sort of is see if you can. So last will maybe this will last will be our anchor, the word last, and life. Maybe you could move that over. Can you see right? So like there's an edge here, a very strong line that's created with the L here, right here. What if you moved life, like you moved it over, so this part of the L was lined up here. Then you tag it in, like you tie it in to this text. I can see that would work really well. Then with the at the top here, so that's actually, so that almost is lining up here. You can almost move it up, move it over a tiny bit to tie in my guidelines, and it's snapping. So it's, but can you see how this line right here against the A? Well, actually, there it is. Look, there it is. Actually, it is lined up there. So so that's good. You could also line it up. You almost line it. It's, oh yeah, it is almost lined up with the T in here. So if you can do that, if you can actually line it up there, you'd actually, it's good to actually line things up with two parts in a, two lines in a design. So that's almost there. Okay, well, otherwise, I think that you have a very interesting design, and you know, you really clearly put a lot of time and effort into all of these intricate elements, which I think is what makes your design have that kind of depth and kind of mysterious qualities, because we're like trying to figure out what's happening. Okay, all right, good luck with the rest of the class, and I look forward to seeing your final. Lori, yes, I agree with you. I think this seems quite modern, and you know, I really think that you're just, the way you worked on your background in the beginning stages has really created a really nice sort of just sense of um, this being about graphic design. You know, it really emphasizes that. I just think with the emphasis on shape and line, and you know, there's a lot of depth, and just, yeah, I think it works really well. And your text, I think, looks really good too. And I really only have maybe one suggestion here with your text, which is perhaps to brighten a little bit of it, or maybe saturate the text. When I opened it up, you know, the text just didn't quite pop as much as I think it could. And so I'm just kind of swatching the color you have right now in Photoshop. And so there's, you know, you could just literally just kind of, in a way, try to experiment with just slightly lighter. You can just go a little lighter and see if that'll definitely, I mean, it'll automatically make it easier to read. This is a pretty easy fix, to be honest. It's just, you know, whenever you have text or an element that's not standing out, you just kind of increase, a lot of times if you increase the contrast, in this case, you've got a darker background, so just going a little lighter, and you'll also, you know, go towards a little more saturated color, will automatically make it pop. I might even do the same thing with this, but I would start maybe with this and see. Maybe not. I don't know. I bet you could, oh, you know, you're already, maybe you could go a little more saturated. Why not? Yeah, I think that's really the main thing here. I think otherwise, I think this looks really good. And, you know, it's clear that you've spent a lot of time polishing it and considering all the ways the different parts fit together. Okay. Oh, okay. So we have one more design to go. Oh, one, if everybody is still hanging in there listening, just a reminder, make sure to take the final quiz. And I noticed there's a few people who've taken it already, but just make sure to get that done before the end of the session. And unlike the practice quizzes, just keep in mind that it's you can only take it one time. So you have one run through it, and that's the final quiz. So, you know, spend some time maybe like looking through some of the previous quizzes or the previous weeks if you want to, just to refresh your memory of some of the different concepts that we have studied. Okay, Kendra, so I just wanted to, since you posted this just recently, just to take a quick look at your task 2, which you have, let's see, a cool color scheme, achromatic, monochromatic, and warm. Okay, yeah. All right, so and it looks like you have chosen the cool ones. Let's actually just talk about this one because whatever feedback I give you on this one, you can apply into the previous one, your thumbnails for color. So it looks like you're aiming towards potentially a symmetrical design where everything's centered, mirrored. When you do that, I think that in your case, you may want to keep, just refining that. Like, for example, let's go into Photoshop here. Making sure that, this element is centered, everything becomes more symmetrical. Does that make sense? So it looks like everything's over a little bit to the left, so you'd want to pull it to the right. In general, I would say that, when you work with symmetry, you want to make sure that it's really obvious that it's symmetrical so that people aren't like kind of trying to shift it mentally, like visually themselves. So I do that. And then the other thing too is I might make these chairs a little heavier, like give the lines a little more visual weight, because it feels like maybe they're a little bit too light, like they don't have quite enough dimension. They're getting a little lost. I'm not quite sure what this element is here, but it's almost like I want to see it either removed or expanded, like made more of them, like maybe it could be a cool, it almost looks like a little feather, like maybe there could be a whole bunch of them that you fill the space with, which might be interesting. Maybe just sort of feel like add a little bit more to the background, something else that's going on with it. For the text, I would, maybe make it a little bit more symmetrical, like against, like, arranging this so it sits right in the center of the page, and maybe this could be more of a, sometimes it's hard to do these kind of arches, and if that's what's happening where you're having trouble with it, just make it straight text and then maybe make it centered in the page as well. I'm wondering if the spelling, this is a spelling, you need to respell this. I think maybe what you're trying to say is chic with a C-H-I-C, so I might change that. Okay, so those are just some suggestions here to kind of keep playing and experimenting with it. Trying to just kind of continue with your vision and build upon it. I'm sure that with just a little bit more time into, sort of the idea, adding more elements and experimenting with it, you'll have a really interesting design. Okay, all right, everybody, I think that's it. Thank you all for your hard work, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with in the final submission.